If you've brought too much with you tonight, too many memories, too many unfinished thoughts, then rest here. This space was made for quiet arrivals. If tonight feels like too much effort, that's fine. You don't have to fix anything right now. Not your posture, not your inbox, not the long list of mistakes you revisit like a bedtime story gone wrong. Let me hold the story for a while, something older, something far removed. And if it soothes you, leave a quiet word below, like a whisper passed in the dark. Now, let the lights dim. Let the past begin. The stone is wet under your boots, not rain. Just a long seep from somewhere above. Maybe from that little crevice where the roof angles sharply toward the alley. You can't tell. The air smells like ash, but also like old bread and something sharper vinegar. Maybe? Or rotting cabbage. You move slow. It's early, just past dawn, but already something is happening overhead. A sound like dragging wood, and the mutter of someone too tired to swear. You pause, because there's a glint of movement in the window above. A hand. A pot. A moment too late. It arcs. A smooth brown stream, flecked with pale clumps, tumbles through the air and lands with a heavy splash, missing you by a shoulder's width. You don't shout. Shouting would only mark you as new here. This is not a town for noise. It is a town for knowing where to walk, and more importantly, when. The chamber pot isn't thrown maliciously. It isn't even thrown with much energy. It's just part of the rhythm. The 6 a.m. bowel release, followed by the 6:01 sidewalk baptism. Sometimes there's a shout of warning. Gardez low, they yell in French quarters, or something close to it. But often, nothing. Just gravity and whatever lived in the guts of someone above you. And you're just one more figure in the tapestry below. You try to move again, but your boot slips slightly on the splash's edge. It's a reminder, the streets are not yours. They are not even the town's. They belong to the layers of waste that time has forgotten to carry off. And waste is a loyal thing. It doesn't rot in a hurry here. Not when the drains are clogged with pig bones and beer scum. Not when the cobblestones hold every spill like they're building a memory palace of disease. A historian once wrote that the smell of a medieval street could be heard before it was smelled, which is a lovely phrase, poetic. Yes, and entirely wrong, because you don't hear it. Not exactly. You feel it. In your tongue, in your teeth. It settles on your gums like moss. You pass a boy squatting behind a barrel, pants halfway down, focused, not embarrassed. He looks up once and shrugs. He doesn't stop. You nod back. It seems polite. People will tell you the plague was what killed them, or hunger, or war. But they forget what came first, the 1,000 little rituals of rot that made every bite, every breath, every step a wager. You could avoid battle. You could fast and survive. But you could not escape the street. You duck into a smaller alley to avoid a mule cart piled high with soggy hay. The mule looks apologetic. The man steering it does not. You're not hit, but your shoulder brushes the wet hay, and now you carry that with you, a quiet, greenish itch that will bloom later. If you're lucky, it will just be itch. If not, it might be ringworm, or scabies, or a lesion that starts small but never quite heals. Because in this town, infection is the fastest gossip. It travels faster than words and doesn't need permission to stay. You pass a woman sweeping her doorstep, not because it's clean, but because she believes it's her only shield against judgment. Her broom is just a bundle of sticks tied with twine. The dirt goes nowhere. It just rearranges. She glances at your boots and winces, not because they're muddy, but because she knows that kind of splash. She's smelled it before. There's a man dragging a dead dog to the alley's end. You think he's going to bury it, but no, he just props it near the barrel and walks away. It will vanish by noon, or most of it will. There's no public sanitation department. There's no one to report the smell to. The town removes things in the way it breathes slowly, noiselessly, and not always successfully. That's the thing about this place. No one is trying to kill you, but everything is capable of it. The water is unsafe. The food is inconsistent. The air is an almanac of disease. But the street, the humble, wet, indifferent street, that's where it starts. That's where most of the dying begins. You notice a stain on your sleeve, dark, splotchy, like wine but sour smelling. You don't remember how it got there. That's normal. You've learned not to ask questions unless you want to hear the word dysentery at breakfast. Sleep anchor. If your eyelids are heavy, you're exactly where most people stopped paying attention anyway. You pause at the end of the alley, where the light softens and the air smells briefly of yeast, a bakery. You think maybe the day will improve. But behind you, the splatter is still glistening. And above you, a second pot leans toward the sill. You move on. The town is waking up, and that's rarely good news. The first thing you begin to realize slowly, reluctantly, is that the streets never really dry. Even when the sun is high, when the church bell gongs and the market bustles with yelling and barter, the stones underfoot remain slick. Not in an obvious way. Not puddles. Not drips. Just damp, the kind of dampness that clings invisibly until it seeps up into your socks and into the skin between your toes. Until walking feels like pressing your foot into something's open mouth. This is not because of rain. The rain, when it comes, washes nothing away. It only rearranges the layers of rot already embedded into the stone, a low, sticky record of everything this town has failed to bury. If you were to crouch, press your fingers to the cracks between the cobbles, and scrape with a knife something only a madman or a physician would ever do, you would find an archaeological smear of decades, dried blood, clotted grease, flakes of human skin, stray wormy bits of grain, a fingernail perhaps, a tooth if you're lucky or terribly unlucky, all of it pressed into that strange, dark mortar that no one talks about and no one scrapes away. Because this city is not paved with cobblestone. Not really. It is paved with death made dull and just dry enough to forget about, until you don't. Today, like most days, your boots sink a fraction too deep near the butcher's quarter. The stones there have always been soft. Not in the literal sense, no. The stones remain hard, but the space around them has become pliable. They float now, a little. They shift when stepped on. A memory of something too wet, too long ago, that never quite dried out. They say it started when a cow collapsed mid-slaughter, fell with such force that its blood soaked not just the street, but the soil underneath. And when they dug to clean it, they discovered a graveyard no one had remembered. They stopped digging. That was 10 years ago. Since then, the ground has shifted by an inch. Your boots know. You walk faster there. Of course. You could wear wooden pattens, those awkward overshoes meant to keep leather above the filth. But those cost money, and they snap when they strike stone at the wrong angle. More than one merchant's wife has been seen sprawled like a trussed goose after stepping off a curb with too much confidence and too little balance. And besides, pattens make noise sharp. Clopping noise, the kind that makes thieves listen and beggars stare. You'd rather be ignored, so your boots sink, and the rot beneath them speaks in soft squelches, like a breath taken by something just under the surface. A man once told you, over a cup of boiled barley wine, that the ground itself was alive now, not in a mystical, verdant way, but in the sense that a compost heap is alive. He claimed the street he lived on in his youth eventually swallowed his sister whole. 1 minute she was running. The next minute she had vanished between two stones that no longer matched. her shriek ending in a wet crack. Of course, you didn't believe him, but you did walk slower on that street the next time you passed. You still do. Historians argue whether medieval towns had effective waste removal systems. Some claim there were designated dung heaps and midden pits, carts hired to haul refuse just beyond the town walls. And in some rare, well-documented cases, places where royalty kept court, or bishops took particular pride, this was true. But not here. Not in this place. Here, the dung heap is the road, and it is not far beyond the wall. It is at your feet. In the morning, you often see the bakers sprinkle sand outside their doorways, not to clean, but to mask the slime. The sand sticks to everything: boots, hems, even breath. You can taste it as you walk, gritty and oddly sweet from soaking up the drippings of a dozen sausages sold and lost. You pass a boy with a basket. The cloth inside is supposed to be white, but it is brown at the edges. His bare feet slap softly with each step, leaving wet prints behind. He doesn't notice. Or if he does, he's long since stopped caring. No one asks why so many children have coughs that never quite fade, or why so many women bury infants wrapped in towels still warm from the hearth. They blame the seasons, or sin, but not the streets. Never the streets, because to blame the streets would be to admit you walk on poison. And how can you live like that? You reach the square, where a beggar coughs into a cloth blackened at the center. He smiles when he sees you. There are only 6 teeth in his mouth, and none of them point the same direction. He is cheerful because it is still morning and his spot hasn't yet been taken. You step carefully to avoid the puddle near his left foot. It steams slightly, despite the cold. A pig runs by, not a wild one, but not owned either. It has a piece of cloth tied to one leg, which means someone claims it, but not with much conviction. It pauses near a pile of cabbage leaves and snorts once, before nudging them aside with its snout. Then it moves on. You see its hooves leave prints in the grime. Sleep anchor if you've faded in and out. That's all right. So has history. A scholar once wrote that medieval filth was a myth, an exaggeration of Enlightenment writers who wanted to prove they were cleaner, more civilized. And yes, that's partly true. Some towns had bylaws. Some fined people for throwing guts into the street. Some even had inspectors, paid in bread and authority. But those laws, like the soap sold in the square, only worked when someone felt like enforcing them. And more often than not, the man who made the law was also the man selling the spoiled meat. You stop beside the well. A woman fills her jug, her hands cracked and red with the cold. She dips it 3 times, then pours once to rinse, then finally fills it full. She doesn't look at you, but she mutters something as she passes. A prayer, maybe, or a curse. Your boots are wet now. You can feel it not outside, but inside. The rot beneath the boots has begun its slow seep upward. It will not leave. You've brought it with you, and it will stay. You arrive at the bakery, not because you are hungry, though your stomach may twist and whine as if cued by the scent, but because it is the closest building that breathes warm air into the street. The doorway exhales something between smoke and sweetness, and the shutters are swung wide, even though it is still early. A wooden sign hangs limp above the door, no name, just a crude carving of a loaf. There's no need for lettering here. Everyone knows where the bread comes from. The baker is a man whose arms look carved from the same wood as his paddle. His face is hard and soft in alternating patches, a burn scar at the temple, cheeks that flush deeply from the fire, and a beard gone gray, not from age but from flour and smoke. He does not greet you, nor does he need to. You step in because that is what's expected, and you do not speak because neither does he. You place a few coppers on the worn stone counter and point not at the largest loaf, but at one just slightly less burnt than the others. This is an art form, choosing the one that is likely to crumble evenly and not reveal too many holes where mice might have visited in the night. He wraps it in old cloth, already stiff with grease, and slides it toward you. It is not warm, not really, but it pretends to be. Outside again, you sit on the low edge of a shuttered doorway and peel back the cloth. The crust is hard, harder than it should be. You bite, not because you crave it, but because you must. And as the dry crumbs scrape down your throat, you try to ignore the aftertaste of bitterness, almost metallic, like chewing on something that once saw the sun but was buried too long. The poison in the bread is not something you taste directly. It does not announce itself with the dramatic flare of a knife or the sudden drop of a poisoned goblet. No, it's subtle, invisible. It lives in the grain, deep inside, long before the fire ever touches it. It is called ergot. Though no one in this alley knows that name, to them, it is just bad luck. The sickness that comes in dreams, with the burning limbs and the fingers that feel like wood. Historians still argue whether people in the Middle Ages understood the cause of St. Anthony's fire, the holy disease that blackened feet and twisted mouths into grins of agony. Some say they saw it as divine punishment. Others say they blamed witches, or the devil, or the wrong prayer whispered at the wrong time. But no one looked to the loaf in their hand. You eat slowly. There's no rush. The bread will last the day, maybe into tomorrow if you're careful. You do not know where the grain came from. Maybe it was imported from the coast, maybe from a field nearby. Maybe the field flooded 2 months ago and the grain lay damp for weeks before being ground to flour. Mold, like rot, is loyal, and ergot, the silent stowaway, thrives in damp. When it blooms, it weaves alkaloids into the rye. Not enough to smell, not enough to see, but enough to change the way your fingers feel when they touch a wall. Enough to make a child wake screaming in the night with visions they cannot name. Sleep anchor. Some truths are so quiet they sound like dreams. Stay there. The loaf cracks at the bottom, revealing a tunnel-like void where air or something else had made a home. You pretend not to notice. You keep chewing. You tell yourself it's fine. The first signs, if they come, will not be dramatic. Maybe you'll feel dizzy. Maybe you'll dream more vividly than usual. Maybe your toes will tingle. You'll blame the cold. You always do. But in some unlucky few, the fire spreads from the belly to the limbs. Fingers shrivel, feet blacken, muscles spasm like they are dancing to a music no one else can hear. In time, the skin cracks open at the joints. The bleeding is slow, but the pain never is. And all from a slice of bread you never questioned. There are no labels here, no best before dates, no inspectors or barcodes or sterile gloves. The baker's paddle is stained darker at one end. That end never touches the oven. You wonder why. Then you stop wondering, because wondering too much about food makes eating harder, and you still have to eat. There is a girl near you, thin, with a ribbon tied to one wrist, her dress patched at the hem with a different fabric than the rest. She clutches her own loaf, smaller than yours, and breaks off a piece with her teeth. She looks up once, meets your eyes, and gives the briefest nod. You do not smile. It feels wrong to smile when chewing is still difficult. A priest passes, muttering to himself. His robes are damp at the hem. You don't know his name. No one really does. He comes through this street only to collect leftovers for the abbey pigs. And to bless the dying, he does not stop for either of you. That you take as a small victory. The bread turns sour halfway through. Your tongue recoils, but you swallow anyway. Waste is worse than taste. You know that. There's a story told by midwives, passed between whispers and eye rolls, of a woman who gave birth screaming, not in pain but in visions, saying she saw the Virgin walking backward, her eyes covered in thorns. The child, they say, was born pale and still, and the midwife never touched rye bread again. You don't know if the story is true, but someone clearly believed it enough to repeat it. And repetition is how things become real here. You glance down at the cloth. Only a third of the loaf remains. You will save it for evening. You'll reheat it near the hearth if you can find space. Maybe soften it with a bit of broth if any neighbor has spare bone water to offer. But part of you dreads the second bite. Not because of the taste, but because the hallucinations, when they come, are always sharper the second time. You once saw a bird with 3 wings flying in a circle above your bed. You remember it clearly, though it never happened. It's always the same with this kind of poison. You remember too much and too little, in all the wrong places, and no one ever blames the baker. They blame the stars, or the wind, or their own sins. They say, God is testing me, or it was just a fever, or I shouldn't have looked that stranger in the eye. They never say, it was the loaf, because the loaf is sacred, it is daily, it is survival. Even when it kills, you've only just finished the last bite of bread stale, slightly sour, and grainy with something that doesn't belong when your throat begs for something to chase it. Water, of course, is a gamble, a wager between thirst and illness. And today, you're not in the mood for gambling that involves your bowels. So you go for what the rest of the town chooses when thirst and uncertainty cross paths. Ale. It's not celebration. It's not indulgence. Ale is safer than the stream, and it's warm enough to pass as comfort when comfort is in short supply. You follow the scent of yeast and smoke toward the brew house. It's a low building with a sagging roof. One wall made entirely from patched barrels. Outside, 2 men sit on overturned buckets, arguing quietly about whether the pigs should be penned before the rain returns. They don't look at you, though one does nod toward the side door. You duck through it. Inside. The light is soft, filtered through oily cloths stretched over broken windows. It smells like boiled vegetables, wet wood, and sweat that never entirely leaves the room. A woman with sleeves rolled high above the elbow sloshes ale into mismatched mugs. Her hands are stained purple, not from wine, but from the berries she uses to hide the bitterness in a weak batch. You slide a coin onto the table. She eyes it, shrugs, and slides you a wooden cup that's slightly warm to the touch. She doesn't bother wiping it. No one here does. Whatever was left by the last mouth is now yours to carry forward. The first sip is always shocking. It tastes like fish oil wrapped in wet cloth and steeped in sour oats. But your throat is dry and your instincts older than caution, so you keep drinking. No one talks about it, but you know it ale brewed in barrels that once held fish. Brine doesn't always lose the memory of its first life. Some of these barrels come from ships, some from slaughter yards. Some are traded so many times no one remembers what they were meant to hold. And so the ale remembers everything, and it tells you, one gulp at a time. After a few swallows, your belly begins to settle, no longer gnawing at itself. There's comfort in the warmth that spreads from your chest outward, slow and oddly soothing. But comfort, here, is rarely pure. The brew today is cloudy, a shade too green. You glance down at the rim of the mug and see a faint shimmer, not foam, not light, something else. The brewmistress sees your hesitation and smirks. If you see colors, sit down, she says without stopping her pour. Better to fall than to run crooked. You nod and move to the corner where a bench curves along the wall. The wood is sticky, and something crunches under your foot. You don't investigate. you don't need to know. Some say ale was safer than water in medieval towns. That's true in theory, yes. The boiling process killed much of what the river might offer in its worst moods. But that truth is like everything here, only partial. Because what killed you wasn't always bacteria. Sometimes what killed you was rot in the grain. Sometimes it was lead in the pipes, used to cool the liquid faster. Sometimes it was the herbs tossed in for medicine: foxglove, hemlock, pennyroyal, chosen more for their reputation than their safety. Historians still debate whether blindness was common after certain brews, or whether that's an exaggeration passed down by temperance writers and frightened monks. But your eyes have seen enough bleary stares and sudden collapses to know that exaggeration doesn't need to lie. It only needs to forget the context. You take another sip. The bitterness fades with each swallow. That's how it gets you. They call it bread in a cup, but not because it nourishes, because it fills, because it silences the questions in your belly and, eventually, in your mind. Sleep anchor. We've wandered far. If you're not awake for the rest, neither were most of them. You hear someone vomiting behind the barrels. That, too, is part of the brew. You finish your cup and leave the mug on the bench. No one will wash it. No one will claim it. But it will be used again. Outside, the air feels heavier. The sky, bloated with gray, hangs low over the rooftops. The market buzz is quieter now. People have eaten. They've drunk. Some are already lying on steps or huddled beneath carts, dozing. You pass a man slumped beside a loaf of bread that's half eaten and black at the edges. Mold blooms there, green-white tufts like tiny forests on a poisoned hill. He's not dead, yet, but he doesn't move when you step past. The bread, if eaten fully, would burn the gut. It might cause hallucinations, or a paralysis that starts in the fingers and moves upward. Or nothing at all. It depends on the batch. Depends on the stomach. Depends on the week's sins. And that's the worst part of it. Everything here depends. You cross the street toward the baker's side wall, where heat still escapes in gusts from a vented window. You lean your back against the stone, feeling the last of the oven's warmth trace its way up your spine. It feels good. Grounding. But you can still taste the ale, and now your tongue feels thick. Not numb, not sharp, just foreign. You try to remember how many sips you took. Was it 4? 5? You're not sure, and that, too, is the ale working, not poisoning you fully. Not tonight, but just enough to bend the corners of your clarity. You feel a laugh rise in your chest, small and uninvited. It spills out as a cough. Someone across the way mirrors you, a cough sharp and wet. A man holding a jug, leaning against a pole. He nods, as if to say, same brew, same fate. You both look away. If you return to the brew house tomorrow, she will remember you. Not by name, but by the way you held the cup, whether you tipped it quickly or cautiously, whether you wiped your mouth after the second sip or didn't bother. These are the measurements people use here. Names are too slippery, too easily forgotten, but gestures, those live longer. Your vision sharpens briefly, then softens. A wave passes through you, not nausea, not sleep, but something in between. You walk home slowly, not because you're tired, but because you don't quite trust your legs. The ale is in them now, just enough. You pass the same pig from earlier. Its eyes are half closed. You envy it. You step in something warm. You do not check what it is. You do not want to know. It is late afternoon by now, though time in a medieval town is not marked by clocks, but by noise or the absence of it. The bells have rung their final working hour. The children's shouting has turned to murmurs, and the smoke has shifted from cook fires to hearth embers. You can smell turnips in the air, maybe onions, maybe just the ash of both. You are walking carefully now, not because of the ale, though it lingers in your spine like a warm, muddy echo, but because the street has grown unpredictable. It isn't the stones, it's the pigs. One comes toward you now, not charging, not afraid, just moving with the casual confidence of something that knows it belongs more than you do. It's large. This one, dark-skinned, with patches of dried mud across its flank, and one torn ear that flops with each step. There's a rope loosely looped around one leg, trailing like a forgotten thought. The pig pauses near a puddle, snorts once, then begins to root at something invisible just beneath the surface. You do not interrupt it. In towns like this, pigs are not pets. They are not livestock in the distant field sense either. They are public workers, sanitation crews with hooves and snouts. They eat what no one else will, and they do it in full view, day after day. Bones, rotting cabbage, spoiled meat, human waste, all of it vanishes into their thick, wet mouths. And then, sometimes, they vanish too, into kitchens, into cellars, into the bellies of those who can afford to pretend they don't recognize the squeal. But before that, they walk free. Free enough, in fact, that the town once held a trial. Not a metaphorical trial, not a fable. A real one with a magistrate, a clerk, and 3 sworn witnesses, one of whom cried the entire time and refused to look at the accused. Because the accused was a pig. The story, like most worth telling here, begins with a scream. A child small, fast, unattended, wandered near the cart paths by the butcher's stalls. No one noticed right away. These things happen often enough that only the aftermath feels unusual. They say the pig had been startled, or hungry, or simply curious. Whatever the reason, when they found the child, his face was torn, his hands clawed at the empty air, and the pig stood beside him, chewing. Not blood, not bone, just chewing. Still, they blamed it. The townsfolk demanded justice. And justice, as they understood it, was spectacle. So they summoned the scribe and opened the old book of civic law, the one written in ink that had faded from black to rust, its corners nibbled by something long dead. There it was: if any beast cause mortal injury to a Christian soul, let it be judged in public court. And so it was. The pig was chained, not tightly, just enough to give the illusion of submission. It stood calmly through the proceedings, snorting occasionally, twitching its ears as if bored. The magistrate asked questions, rhetorical of course. Witnesses spoke. One said the pig had shown malice. Another claimed it had acted in self-defense. A third suggested perhaps the child had struck first, that he had been cruel, as boys are sometimes cruel, and the pig had only responded. Historians still argue whether animals were truly tried as moral agents, or whether such trials were theatrical warnings meant to discipline human behavior through proxy punishment. But none of those scholars were there, watching the butcher wipe his knife and look away, pretending he had no stake in the outcome. The verdict: guilty. The sentence: execution followed by burial outside the walls, unblessed. But here is the strange part. The execution never came. That night, the pig vanished. Some say it was stolen. Some say it was released. Some say it simply wandered off, as pigs are known to do, and no one had the courage to stop it. Weeks later, a remarkably similar pig with one torn ear and a limp that hadn't been there before was spotted near the abbey kitchens. No one said anything, because in this town, silence is also a kind of justice. You are standing now near the alley where that trial supposedly happened. The stones here feel smoother, more worn, perhaps because the story has been told so often. The place itself has taken on the shape of its memory. A small pig, much younger, trots by with a carrot top dangling from its mouth. You watch it go. It does not fear you. You've seen people treat pigs with more caution than they treat each other. Pigs do not hold grudges. They do not lie. They bite only when cornered or hungry, and in this town, everyone is one or the other. You think back to the bread, to the ale, to the way the woman at the brew house had looked at you not unkindly, but not with any illusion that you'd be remembered tomorrow. You think of how many pigs walk these streets, and how many people do not sleep anchor. If your eyelids are heavy, you're exactly where most people stopped paying attention anyway. There is another story, older still, of a sow that raised a human infant after its mother died in childbirth. The child grew up speaking in grunts and crawling on all fours. It's not true. Couldn't be. But that hasn't stopped 3 separate midwives from swearing they knew someone who swore it happened. In this town, the line between animal and man is not so sharp. Both survive on scraps. Both are kicked when in the way. Both are eaten when necessary. You begin walking again, careful of your steps. A wet cabbage leaf clings to your boot. You scrape it off against the stones, which still gleam from the morning's miseries. Ahead, the light has shifted. The sun, if it exists today, is lowering itself behind the rooftops with a slow sigh of resignation. The pigs retreat now back to corners, to pens, to shadows where the leftover warmth of cooking fires still lingers. You watch one disappear beneath a cart stacked with kindling. It does not glance back, and for a moment, brief and strangely soft, you wish you could follow it. Just lie down. Let the hooves shuffle around you. Let the night swallow the day. No trials, no bread, no ale, no more guessing what's safe and what's a sentence. Just the stillness of something that doesn't need to explain itself. But you do not follow, because there is more to walk, and the streets do not end just because your feet are tired. He coughs again just as you're passing the Cooper's Lane, that narrow side path between the tannery and the toolsmith's shed, where sunlight never quite reaches, even in summer. It's a wet cough, thick and full of something that doesn't belong in the lungs of a boy no older than 16. But it's not the cough that stops you. It's the sound he makes afterward, a small, choking laugh, like he's already given up on caring whether the next breath comes easy or not. You glance sideways, not wanting to appear too interested. Curiosity can be mistaken for intrusion in towns like this. But there he is, thin arms, soot-smudged cheeks, and a jawline that still looks unfinished, like the sculptor left for supper and never came back. He wears the apron of a blacksmith's apprentice, stained, cracked, and crusted with the memories of flame. His left sleeve is too short, and one sandal is patched with twine. He leans against a stack of discarded horseshoes and grins when your eyes meet. He knows what you're thinking. Everyone knows. In a town where coughing is constant, where every second alley echoes with the bark of lungs turned brittle, there are only 2 responses: ignore it and walk faster, or acknowledge it and risk catching what comes next. You nod instead. Not quite sympathy, not quite fear, just recognition. The human equivalent of, I see you, and I don't know what else to do. He spits. A thick glob lands in the dirt, darkened with streaks of something red. Not bright red, not the sharp crimson of a fresh wound, but the brownish rust of blood that's been fighting its way out for days. It glistens for a moment before being trampled by a passing cartwheel. He doesn't wipe his mouth. There's no point. In better towns, cleaner towns, richer towns, a cough like that might earn a day's rest, or a medic's visit, or at the very least, a whispered prayer from someone passing. But here, in this street where the air smells faintly of burned leather and urine, a cough is just punctuation, a pause between labor and collapse. Historians still debate the spread of pulmonary illnesses in towns like this, whether tuberculosis was common or whether what they called consumption was a bundle of different ailments mistaken for one. Some argue it was worsened by the soot. Others blame bad air. Still others say it was the overcrowding, the shared bowls, the habit of sleeping 5 to a bed. But no one can argue with the outcome. The coughing boys died first. Not in war, not in famine, but quietly, in corners, with blackened teeth and eyes that sank before the rest of them followed. The apprentice shifts his weight. You can hear the rasp in his breathing now, like bellows clogged with ash. He's not working today. Perhaps his master finally told him to rest, though you doubt it. More likely, he's been told not to scare the customers. He gestures with his chin toward the forge, just barely visible through the open door behind him. Inside, the hammering continues. Sparks fly. The rhythm as constant as a heartbeat. Another apprentice, or maybe just the master alone, continuing the work. There's no waiting for the sick. The forge must burn. Iron doesn't care who shapes it. The boy chuckles again, though it sounds more like a wheeze. They say it's the coal, he mutters. Not quite to you. Say it clogs your chest, like breathing bricks. You nod again. He's not wrong. The blacksmiths burn whatever they can find. Coal, yes, but also peat. Sometimes bones, sometimes things better left unnamed. The smoke never leaves. It clings to skin, to cloth, to the inside of the mouth. You've tasted it before, sour and metallic, like licking the edge of a blade that's been left in the rain. He lifts his hand to scratch at his chest, then stops, as though the effort isn't worth it. His fingers tremble slightly, the kind of tremble that doesn't come from nerves, but from depletion, the slow, steady erosion of strength that happens when the body begins to forget what healthy feels like. You want to ask his name. You don't, because knowing names makes loss harder, and this boy is already halfway gone. Sleep anchor. If you've faded in and out, that's all right. So has history. A chicken scurries past your feet, pecking at something too small to see. A woman calls after it, swearing in a dialect that sounds more spit than speech. Life continues. He sinks a little lower against the wall. You wonder how long he's been out here. You wonder how long he has left. There's a story told by the older smiths. They say when an apprentice dies, the fire burns differently that night, that the coals hiss in protest, that the tools remember the hands that once gripped them, that the anvil feels colder, heavier, less willing to ring. You don't believe it, but you want to, because something should notice. Someone should mark the moment when a boy who once carried buckets of water and fetched nails with a grin can no longer stand without leaning. But no one will. The town doesn't have time to mourn apprentices. Not when there are shoes to mend, nails to strike, and wheels to fit. You finally speak. Just 2 words. Need anything? He shrugs. Already had my bread, he says. Though you see no crumbs, no cloth wrapping, no signs of recent eating. He's lying, but it's the polite kind of lie. The kind that says, I don't want your pity. I just want this to end on my terms. You respect that. You don't offer more. Instead, you reach into your pocket and slide a small piece of soft cloth into his lap. It's barely clean, but better than nothing. He doesn't thank you, just holds it for a moment, then tucks it under his leg like he'll use it later. You know he won't, but still something should be left behind. You walk away before he coughs again, not because you fear infection, but because you fear the sound will follow you. And in this town, there are already too many sounds you can't forget. You hadn't planned on going to the bathhouse. Few people ever really plan to go. You end up there the same way you end up lost in a dream. You didn't know you were having tired, aching, crusted, with a week of grime, and dimly aware that the reek following you has become a kind of companion. Even then, you hesitate, not because of the heat or the price, but because you know what enters the bathhouse is not always what leaves it. Still, today the pain in your shoulders has rooted itself so deep it feels ancestral, a gift passed down through generations of bending, hauling, and sleeping on floors. So you go. You find it tucked behind the guild hall, its entrance narrow and forgettable, a wooden arch damp with the breath of steam. The door hangs on one hinge. You push it open slowly, and the heat greets you like a wet hand to the face. It is not clean heat. It is the kind of warmth that knows too much, saturated with old sweat, faint urine, boiled herbs, and the lingering undertones of rot disguised as rosemary. It is the scent of communal desperation. You undress in a room that is never truly dark, but never fully lit either. Smoke-stained lanterns hang from ceiling beams. One flickers. Another has gone out entirely. The benches are warped from moisture. The floor slick. A fat spider lives in the corner and has witnessed every visitor for years. You place your clothes on a hook, not because you believe they'll be there when you return, but because it's easier than holding them. The coin for entry is slipped into the hand of a boy whose eyes are clouded with something that doesn't look like childhood. He doesn't speak, just gestures toward the curtain. You pass through. Inside, the steam clings to your skin like wet cloth. Shapes move in the mist, outlines of bodies, slow and glistening. Some speak in murmurs. Others do not speak at all. The floor creaks beneath your bare feet. Water sloshes. Somewhere, someone sighs in a way that sounds almost like weeping. You lower yourself into the nearest pool. It is warm, not hot, not refreshing, just warm, the temperature of breath held too long in the mouth. You try not to think about how many others have sat where you sit. You try not to think about what has soaked into the wood. The water laps against your chest. You close your eyes. And you breathe. That is the trap of the bathhouse. The first few minutes lull you. They whisper lies about healing, about peace. They let you forget just briefly the weight of your clothing, the sting of your unwashed scalp, the ache in your knees. Then the lies begin to peel. Someone coughs. It is not a dry cough. You flinch slightly but do not open your eyes. You hear movement, a shift of limbs, a splash, the scrape of a bucket. Then silence. The silence is worse. You open one eye. Across the room, a woman is scrubbing her arms with a cloth that looks more like a rag used to polish boots. She is thorough. You respect her for that, but you see the sores on her forearm, round and dark, crusted at the edges like burnt fruit. You look away before she sees you seeing them. Another figure, a man, rises from the far end of the pool. Water spills off him in sheets. His back is marked with long welts, some old, some fresher. You do not ask how he got them. No one does. Not here. A scholar once described the medieval bathhouse as a place of bodily renewal and moral ambiguity. He was only half right. There is no renewal here, only delay. You close your eyes again. The heat begins to work its way inward. Your muscles stop resisting. Your thoughts loosen. And then someone screams. Not loud, not long. Just a sharp cry, the kind that doesn't mean death, but does mean pain. It echoes through the rafters, caught in the wood like a bird in a church. Then it fades. You open your eyes. No one else moves. No one speaks. This, too, is part of the ritual. The bathhouse offers relief, yes, but also risk. Because you never know who sits beside you. You never know what bleeds into the water. Sleep anchor. Some truths are so quiet they sound like dreams. Stay there. You remember a story told in whispers at the tavern, a tale of a man who left the bathhouse with more boils than he entered with. They said he sat too long, that he inhaled something in the steam, that the water was heavy that day, whatever that means. They buried him within the week. His widow did not cry. She remarried a butcher by winter. You lean your head back against the stone. The water hugs you too closely. You begin to sweat. That's when you notice the figure sitting across from you, cloaked in steam. Face hidden, body still. They haven't moved, haven't blinked, haven't spoken. You wait. Stillness is unnerving when it does not belong to the water. Finally, the figure stands and steps out of the pool. The water clings to them reluctantly. You catch a glimpse of their hands swollen, purple at the knuckles, one nail blackened. They walk with a limp. Their towel is gone. They do not notice. You breathe deeply through your nose. It smells worse now. The heat turns on itself. You rise. The floor is slicker than before. Your foot nearly slides, but you catch yourself on the wall stone slick with moss or something like it. You do not look closely. You return to the dressing room, where your clothes hang as you left them. That is a small mercy. You dry yourself with a patch of cloth provided for that purpose. It is wet already. You use it anyway. Dressed again, you step outside. The air hits you like a second baptism. It is cold, sharp, honest. For a moment, you almost believe you are cleaner. Then you smell your own skin and realize the bathhouse only made everything stick closer. You walk home through empty streets, the last sunlight curling around corners like smoke. And as you pass a drainage ditch, you hear the splash of something small falling in. You do not look. Not tonight. You hear it before you see her. Not the bell itself. At first, just a hush, an absence. The kind of silence that feels deliberate, like the town has taken a slow breath and is holding it. Then, from far down the lane, a soft clinking begins, a sound like a spoon stirring a metal pot. Unhurried, delicate. It comes in pairs a rhythm, not unlike a lullaby, though it carries no comfort. The sound is the leper's bell, and everyone who hears it knows what to do. You step to the edge of the street, as does the man hauling barrels. The washerwoman abandons her path mid-stride. Even the dog that had been picking through a pile of bones slinks behind a cart and waits, ears flat. This is not law. This is older than law. It is fear dressed in courtesy. And then she appears, small, hunched, and wrapped in layers of cloth so thick and faded, they seem made, not of fabric, but of years. Her face is not covered. That is the first surprise. Most wear a hood, a veil, anything to mask the signs. But she does not hide. Her skin is pale, waxen. Her nose is mostly gone. One eye remains, and it is bright, not with fever, but with the cold clarity of someone who expects nothing and fears even less. The bell is tied to a thin rod, which she taps lightly as she walks. Clink, pause, clink, pause. It is not meant to startle. It is meant to give you time. Time to look away. Time to make space. Time to wonder how long it will take before the same bell is handed to you. She does not speak. She does not need to. Her presence speaks enough. You don't know her name. No one does. Names, for the marked, are often the first thing to disappear. Not stolen, just forgotten, replaced by whispers. That one. Her, the woman from the kiln path. She walks with a limp that looks more practiced than painful. There's dignity in it, and that makes you feel something you can't quite name. Pity, perhaps, guilt, maybe, or just the uncomfortable recognition that she is not other. She is only further along. You watch as she stops at a water barrel, one that no one else uses. She dips a ladle her own, tied to her belt, and drinks slowly. She wipes the rim with a cloth. Then, gently, she replaces the lid. Even in exile, she is careful. Even in decay, she is polite. Historians still debate the status of lepers in medieval society. Some were cloistered, banished to leprosaria communities, hidden at the edge of known maps. Others remained inside towns, permitted to exist so long as they wore their marks bells, cloaks, wooden clappers. There are stories of towns that held funeral rites for the newly diagnosed, treating them as spiritually dead, though their lungs still breathed. There are other stories, softer ones, of kind bakers who left loaves on windowsills, of children who snuck drawings into the hems of their mothers' shawls before they vanished into the fields. The truth, as always, is somewhere in the middle, because fear is not always cruel. Sometimes it is just quiet. You follow her, not close enough to alarm her, but near enough to see where she goes. She turns down an alley that leads nowhere, a dead end with no doors, no windows, just broken stones and a wall grown thick with moss. And there she stops. There is a basket at the base of the wall. Someone has left it. Inside are 2 turnips, a crust of bread, and a linen wrap. She kneels slowly, like the bones no longer answer as quickly as they once did. Her hands are bare. You do not look away, though part of you wants to, because in that moment, she is not tragic. She is holy, not in the church's sense, not in the way of relics or incense or saints in stained glass, but holy in the way of enduring in the quiet, stubborn act of being alive when nothing asked her to be. Sleep anchor. We've wandered far. If you're not awake for the rest, neither were most of them. She unwraps the linen. Inside, there is a small piece of cured meat. She nods to herself, a small nod, like a private joke. She places it carefully in her pouch and does not eat yet. Perhaps she is saving it. Perhaps the ritual matters more than the hunger. You step back. She does not see you, or maybe she does and chooses not to react. Either way, you are dismissed not rudely, but naturally, as one ghost dismisses another. You return to the street. The others have moved on. The washerwoman resumes her path. The barrel hauler grunts and begins dragging again. The dog emerges and returns to the bones. The silence breaks, but it leaves something behind. A film, a residue. You feel it on your skin. There is a saying that when the bell stops, someone else begins to hear it in their dreams. You don't believe that, but tonight, when you close your eyes, you know you will remember the sound, not loud, not shrill, just soft enough to haunt. Clink, pause, clink, and maybe, just maybe, you'll dream of her walking again, not toward exile, but into some better place where bells are not needed, and the only mark left on her is the one time has drawn across us all. You hear them before you see them, just as the fire begins to settle and the night leans fully into its darkness. They're quiet at first, so quiet that, for a moment, you tell yourself it's the wind, or your bones shifting, or a memory rubbing against itself. But then comes the scratch, the unmistakable rhythm of claws on wood. Light, fast, determined. Not like a thief, not like anything human, and certainly not like a ghost. There's more than one. There's always more than one. You sit still, letting the last warmth from the hearth cling to your knees, trying to pretend that the scratches are nothing more than an old beam creaking. But you know better. Everyone in this town knows better, because long before the bells rang out to warn of sickness, long before the monks wrote of plagues in their ledgers, long before the cough turned wet and the skin turned black, the rats were already here. They are not new. They do not arrive with the sickness. They precede it. They are its escort. You shift slightly, and the movement is enough to silence them briefly. The scratching pauses, then resumes. Further to the left this time, beneath the floorboards that haven't been lifted in years, beneath the dusty corner where the boots are kept and the mold has made a permanent home. You know the layout. You could tap your foot now and they would scatter, but not far, not out, just into the walls, into the gaps, into the places no one cleans because no one remembers how. A scholar once claimed that medieval rats were not to blame for the plague, that it was fleas, or lice, or perhaps even human contact alone. He cited experiments, letters, plague pits. Another scholar replied that the rats' immunity to poison made them more dangerous, not less, that they walked through the town like messengers, bearing no message but carrying death anyway. And still others said it was spiritual corruption, that disease was God's justice made flesh. None of that matters here, because tonight they are under your floor. You rise slowly, more tired than afraid. The air is close, too warm, too thick with ash and breath. You move toward the wall where the sound is strongest and place your hand against the plaster. The scratching stops again, this time for longer. It is easy to imagine they are listening. Not to your footsteps, not to your breath, but to your heartbeat. That small, soft drum they always seem to find before the fever starts. Because that's how it begins, isn't it? A scratch beneath the floor. A flicker of movement in the rafters. A shadow where no candle was placed. Then the bite. Then the boil. Then the silence. The town has known this before. They do not speak of it loudly now. Not after the last time, but the stories remain, passed over stew pots and behind shuttered windows. How old Marta found 5 dead rats by her bread box and died 2 days later, her tongue purple and her eyes too dry to close. How the gravedigger's boy bragged about roasting one over a fire, then vanished by morning. How the priest stopped shaking hands for an entire season. You remember the rumors from your childhood how a rat once climbed into a baby's cradle and gnawed off 3 fingers before anyone noticed. You believed it then. You still do. Because the rats here are not shy. They live with you. They own the spaces between your walls, the crawlways under your floor, the beams above your bed. You rent your home from them. Every bite you take, every corner you claim, is a negotiation. And when you lose, they do not gloat. They simply multiply. You sit again, wrapping your shawl tighter. It's thinner than it once was. The wool is worn smooth. The color faded from blue to something closer to ash. You try to focus on the fire, though it has burned low and now looks more like a memory of fire than fire itself. You tell yourself the rats will stay below tonight, that they will not rise to the counter, to the table, to the cradle, that they will be content with crumbs. But you do not believe yourself, because the night is long, and they are always hungry. Sleep anchor. If your eyelids are heavy, you're exactly where most people stopped paying attention anyway. You close your eyes briefly. When you open them again, the sound has changed. It's not scratching now. It's chewing. That wet, rhythmic grind that teeth make when meeting something soft enough to yield and dense enough to resist. It's a sound that feels almost intimate. You know that they've found something, perhaps a heel of bread left too near the wall, perhaps the dried husk of something once living. It doesn't matter what. What matters is that they're eating inside your house. You stand, moving toward the hearth where a poker rests beside the ashes. You grip it, not to use, not yet, but to feel something in your hand, something solid, something louder than teeth. You stamp once. The chewing stops, but only for a moment. Then, from somewhere behind the wall, you hear them continue further back now, deeper inside, where you can't reach. They know the house better than you. They know where the plaster is weak, where the brick ends, where the old wood has begun to rot. You sit again. You wait. The rats are not just animals. They are symptoms. They are the first whisper of sickness. The bell before the bell. They do not need to carry plague to carry dread. Their presence alone is enough to hollow the belly and quicken the pulse. And so you wait, because in this town, waiting is all that can be done. You wait for the scratching to fade, for the chewing to slow, for sleep to arrive before the scratching returns. You pull your shawl tighter and tuck your feet beneath you. And you listen to the floor, to the walls, to the soft murmur of a town holding its breath. The morning finds you already awake. Though you cannot say when you stopped sleeping, it wasn't sudden, not a jolt, not a gasp, just the slow drift back toward awareness. The kind that slips in quietly through a crack in the ceiling and settles across your chest before your eyes remember how to open. You've been lying still for too long, and your bones announce it with a chorus of aches. The fire is dead. The hearth is cold. Your breath fogs in the air. You haven't moved, but the cold has crept into the bedding anyway. And still, the walls are sweating. That's what strikes you first. The dampness. The stone behind your head is slick, not dripping, but gleaming a soft sheen that seems to grow each day, no matter how long the fire burns or how often you scrub. It smells like mushrooms now, or like earth that has forgotten the sun. You sit up slowly. The stiffness in your neck whispers of something slept on wrong. But deeper than that is another whisper, the one that says maybe it wasn't the way you slept at all. Maybe it's the wall. Maybe it's what lives inside it. Because lately, the wall has started to breathe. You've told no one. Of course, that's not the kind of thing one says aloud. Not in a town like this. Not when priests listen as closely as neighbors. But you feel it, the pulse beneath the plaster. The subtle change in the temperature of the stones. Sometimes, when the wind is quiet and the rats have gone still, you hear it, the soft sound of something moving behind the masonry. Not fast, not animal, just movement. Intentional, slow. And it's not just sound. There are the spots, dark patches spreading like bruises across the corner near the roof beam. You noticed them 2 days ago faint, at first, the color of soot. Now they are darker, greener, and ringed with pale halos, like something growing under glass. You reached up once to touch them, and the surface beneath your fingers felt soft. Not crumbling, not dry. Soft. That was when the dreams began. They are not dreams, exactly. More like memories you're certain aren't yours. Waking moments tangled with thoughts you don't recognize. Faces you've never seen. A woman with blue fingers, laughing in the rain. A door that leads only to more doors. The sound of dripping that turns, slowly, into breathing. You wake from them uncertain of where you are, unsure if the things you see belong to now, or to something else, something living in the walls, or behind them, or beneath. You told yourself it was the cold. That's what it does, doesn't it? Twists the mind, gnaws at sleep, paints hallucinations on the backs of your eyes. But you've lived through winters before, colder than this, longer than this, and never once did the stone bleed. You glance again at the spot in the corner. It has spread. Mold, that's what they call it. Black mold, green mold. The house sickness. In the tavern, they joke that it eats men from the mind first, that a man who sleeps too near a damp beam begins to forget names, then days, then who he is, then how to leave. Historians still argue whether mold was truly responsible for outbreaks of madness, the wandering fever, the dancer's plague, the endless laughing sickness that once swept through a village and left 20 people collapsed from joy they could not stop. Some claim it was mold mixed with ergot. Others say it was spiritual unrest, or trauma passed between generations like a bruise no one remembers receiving. But you don't need scholars to tell you that something is wrong. You rise and step closer to the wall. The air near it feels warmer, but wrong thick, cloying, as though each breath pulls in not oxygen, but memory. Your memory, twisted slightly. You look down and see your own hand, but for a moment it feels like it belongs to someone else. Sleep anchor. Some truths are so quiet they sound like dreams. Stay there. You shake your head. Focus. Your hands are yours. Your name is yours. Your thoughts are still your own for now. You reach up and scrape at the mold with a broken spoon you've kept near the door. The mold peels reluctantly, clinging to the stone with invisible fingers. Underneath, the wall is damp, almost spongy. The smell is stronger now, not foul, but rich, in the way of compost left too long under damp leaves. You wipe your hand against your apron and step back. Something shifts in the wall. You freeze. Nothing moves. No sound, just that sense, that feeling of being observed by something with no eyes. You back away slowly and pull your shawl tighter. The room is the same as it was yesterday, and yet it isn't. The shadows are deeper now. The corners seem to lean inward. You feel as though you've stepped into a room that remembers you and not fondly. You open the door to the street. The air outside is bracing, cold, sharp, honest. You breathe it in deeply. You need to leave, just for a moment, just far enough to forget the texture of that wall. You walk, not fast, not frantic, just forward, past the baker, who wipes his hands on his apron and eyes you briefly. Past the alley where the apprentice once sat coughing. The space is empty now. Past the cart that always leans left, still unmoved since last week. You walk until the sky opens above you and the wind finds your skin. And then you breathe again. You will not return to that wall tonight. You will sleep near the hearth, wrapped in too many layers, your head against the floor instead of stone. You will light candles, not for light, but for company. You will hum, softly, songs you only half remember from childhood. And in the morning, when you wake, you will check the wall again. You will check to see if the mold has reached the door. And you will try, as you always do, to remember how long it's been spreading. Because mold does not arrive suddenly. It creeps. And sometimes, so does madness. You follow the lane that winds past the back of the chapel, where the stones are warm from midday sun and the vines curl like lazy fingers across the walls. You are not looking for prayer, not incense, not forgiveness, not even quiet. You are looking for her. The herbalist, the woman who smells of thyme and vinegar and something else you've never quite named, a scent like metal, but softer, as if someone once tried to turn blood into perfume and almost succeeded. She lives near the edge of the town, in a hut pressed close to the hillside, where the trees lean low as if trying to listen to her thoughts. The door is always open, always. It is her one rule. Let the sick walk in. Let death walk out. Whether that ever happens is not yours to know. Today, there is no cue, which is either a good sign or a very bad one. You step inside. The air is heavy with steam and crushed leaves. Something is boiling, not tea, not soup, but something stranger, thicker. The walls are lined with jars, each with its own constellation of floating roots, coiled stems, shriveled berries, and powders the color of things not meant to be touched. Strings of dried flowers hang from the rafters, curling and browning at the edges like old parchment. The smell should be overwhelming, but it isn't. It is balanced as if chaos itself has been measured out in teaspoons and simmered just long enough to become something useful. She is there. Of course. Always. At the back table. Her fingers stained green. A mortar in one hand, pestle in the other, grinding slowly. Her eyes flick up as you enter, and though her face does not smile, her posture softens by a degree. You do not greet her. You do not have to. She does not ask what is wrong. She simply studies you the way someone studies weather. "You're not bleeding," she says after a long silence, "and your eyes are still the same size. So it's either the inside of your head or the inside of your gut." You hesitate. She nods. "Both, then?" She moves with a precision that belies her age. No wasted steps, no unnecessary movements. She pours something into a wooden cup, not from the main pot, but from a smaller vial hidden behind a sheaf of nettles. The liquid is dark, almost black, and smells faintly of fennel and old smoke. You take it without speaking. You drink. The taste is neither good nor bad. It is simply present the way a cold wind is present when it moves through your coat and settles behind your ribs. It coats your throat. It lingers. She watches. "It may help," she says, "or it may make you sleep so long that help is no longer necessary." You nod. This is her way. Never promises. Only possibilities. She begins sorting leaves again. You glance around the hut, at the bundles labeled in her crabbed script for fever, for swelling, for dreams, for when the breath forgets itself. One jar is unlabeled, its contents murky, a twisted root floating like a drowned finger. You do not ask about that one. She speaks again, quieter now. "There was a time when I knew what everything did," she says, "what each stem meant, what each root whispered. But the weather has changed. The soil listens differently. The same herb that soothed a cough last spring now causes vomiting in half the men who drink it." You say nothing. She sighs. "I think the land is tired of being asked for favors. Historians often romanticize the herbalists, calling them wise women, cunning folk, healers walking the line between medicine and myth. Others treat them as threats, suggesting they were witches, feared by clergy, hunted by lords, their knowledge dangerous in the wrong hands. But no chronicler writes what it feels like to watch a mother cradle a child whose fever won't break, to hand her a vial made from your last stalk of bark, and to see her return 3 days later with empty arms and dry eyes. She has lived that moment. You know this. She has lived it too often. Sleep anchor. If your eyelids are heavy, you're exactly where most people stopped paying attention anyway. You shift your weight on the stool. The drink has begun to warm your belly, but there is something else now, a clarity, or a slowness. You can't quite tell which. Your limbs feel heavy. Your vision has softened, not blurred, as if the edges of the world are folding inward to give you space. She pours another measure. "Only if you want to forget," she says. You hesitate. "Then take it. This one burns, not like fire, but like memory sharp at first, then fading into something almost tender. You feel tears at the corner of your eyes, though you are not sad." She speaks again, but not to you. "To treat the body is to make a bargain," she murmurs. "To say, stay a little longer, even if it doesn't want to, but to treat the mind," she trails off. "That's a different kind of trespassing." You watch her fingers nimble, still strong as they tie off a bundle of yarrow. She moves with the grace of someone who has failed beautifully and often. You ask her, finally, if she still believes in cures. She stops, looks up, then answers, "I believe in time." Then, after a pause, "And in sleep." Then, almost smiling, and in forgetting, a little. The hut feels smaller now. You do not know if it is the drink or the words or the silence between them. She presses a packet of dried leaves into your hand. "For the wall," she says. You do not ask how she knew. You thank her, because here, even if it is a guess, it is the best kind of guess. Not hopeful, not certain, just human. And for now, that is enough. The path from the herbalist's hut to the town square is slow this afternoon. Not because your legs are weak, though they are, but because the air seems reluctant to carry you forward. The streets feel narrower than usual, lined with shadows that stretch longer than they should for this hour. And then, before you see it, before your eyes even register what waits at the edge of the next lane, your nose reminds you where you are. The butcher's street. It is a scent you never forget. Not fully. Blood. Yes, but not the sharp, clean blood of new wounds. This is older, heavier, infused with heat and weight. The blood here has mingled with salt, hair, spoiled fat, the breath of men who do not wash, and the low, lazy rot of meat left too long in a damp room. The cobblestones are stained a reddish brown, dark in the crevices, lighter where boots have scuffed the residue down to something less alarming. But they are never clean. No matter how many buckets are thrown, no matter how many sawdust handfuls are scattered, the stones remember. And they remember in color. You arrive just as the day's cutting has finished. A boy no older than 10 is dragging a wooden trough toward the gutter. It leaves a streak behind it thick, glistening. The consistency of syrup gone sour. The boy does not gag. He doesn't even blink. His apron is already soaked through, and the blood on his arms has dried into rivers that follow the shape of his bones. He looks at you once, blankly, then returns to his task. The butcher himself is wiping his cleaver, slow and thorough, as if polishing something sacred. His beard is coarse and yellowed, his sleeves pushed up past the elbow, his forearms strong in a way that speaks more of repetition than health. He hums softly, something tuneless and grim, while 2 dogs circle the chopping block, their eyes locked on a scrap too small to be noticed by anyone not starving. You pause beside a low wall, leaning into the stone more than you mean to. It's warm, but you're not comforted. This street, more than any other, is a lesson in what the town allows, a lesson in necessity, because despite the smell, despite the filth, despite the presence of organs that even crows ignore, this place is tolerated. It is even defended. People need meat. They need protein. They need stew and fat, and the illusion of strength that comes from a full stomach. And for that, they tolerate the overflow. Historians often write about medieval markets as vibrant, bustling centers of life, colorful, noisy, alive. But they write less about the blood, about the way it pooled beneath boots, about how children played beside it, about how no one quite remembered who was meant to clean it up. You do not play here. No one does anymore. Not after the child slipped and cracked her head on the edge of a crate. Not after the pregnant woman stepped in something and wept for hours after. Not after the cart overturned and the pig's organs spilled into the road like a message no one could read. You watch as the butcher lifts a carcass sheep. You think onto a hook. His muscles tense, and for a moment he looks less like a man and more like a machine, a part of the building itself. The hook swings. The sheep turn slowly in the breeze. Flies have arrived already. The butcher does not chase them. He knows they will leave when they've had their fill, and he does not care if they return. Everything in this place returns. The blood, the dogs, the boy, the hunger. You hear the voice before you see the speaker. Careful where you step, someone says. You look down. Too late. Your boot has found the edge of the trough's path. The blood soaks in quickly, and the heat of it surprises you. You lift your foot, but the stain has already claimed the leather. There's no point in scraping it off. It's inside now. Sleep anchor. If you've faded in and out, that's all right. So has history. The speaker is a woman, older, wearing a smock that once was white. She carries a basket filled with cuts wrapped in cloth, no labels, no ties, just meat and memory. She nods toward the butcher. Doesn't waste a thing, she says. Even the eyes. You nod back, unsure if that's a compliment or a warning. She walks on. The dogs have begun to growl now, low and restless. The butcher tosses them a scrap, and they tear it apart too fast for you to see what it was. The boy finishes dragging the trough and empties it into the gutter. The flow moves down the street in slow red waves, disappearing into the earth beneath the cobblestones. You watch it go. You remember a story your mother once told, something half sung, half whispered, about a saint who bled so much her village floated away. You didn't understand it then. You don't understand it now. But standing here, with the blood tracing patterns around your boots, you begin to think perhaps that village did not float. Perhaps it simply sank. You back away, slowly, carefully. Your heel slides slightly, and you steady yourself against the wall. A smear remains on the stone where your hand touched it. The butcher looks up. He nods. Not at you, at the street, at the day, at the fact that it has ended, and still he stands. Still he carves. Still the hook swings. You leave before he nods again, before the dogs turn their gaze, before the blood reaches the corner. The town is quiet outside this street, but you carry the butcher's mark with you now, not as a wound, but as a scent, as a stain, as a truth. There is a certain corner of the town you've learned to avoid if you can help it, especially after heavy rain or the first thaw after frost, when the runoff loosens more than just earth, and all things hidden seem to surface again. The buildings here lean too closely, pressing against one another like conspirators. Their rooftops sloped sharply inward, as if trying to whisper their filth to the street below. You know the path well. Everyone does. But knowing does not mean immunity. You tread carefully. The paving stones here are slicker than elsewhere. Not wet, not visibly, but glazed with the sheen of something that clings even after the air has dried. Your footfalls are slower. Not cautious, exactly, but resigned. Like someone visiting a sick relative they've long stopped praying for. Above you, the privies. They jut out from second floors, suspended like wooden growths, each one a small, rickety box, barely clinging to beams long since bowed by the weight of time, use, and everything else. No two are built alike. Some are patched with planks too narrow, some too wide. Others are missing doors entirely, their openings covered by swaying curtains or nothing at all. A few have crude signs painted in fading ochre, mind thy head, stand clear, or simply, no. There are chutes, in some places slanted gutters meant to guide the waste down and away. In theory, they direct it into pits, barrels, trenches. In theory, in practice. You know better. In practice, you step lightly and don't look up. You remember the story of the tanner's wife, how she left their upper chamber in a rush one winter morning, barefoot and yawning, only to forget that their privy had no latch. The door caught a gust and swung wide. She slipped. They found her 2 hours later, half submerged in the muck beneath, her scream still echoing somewhere between the wood and the straw. She didn't die, but she never smiled the same way again. People say you can survive anything, if you have the will, but that assumes your soul doesn't choose to leave you, even if your body doesn't. You cross beneath a particularly sagging latrine. The beam supporting it has bowed so low that pigeons nest inside now, their feathers dusting the street below. The droppings you see are not always from birds. The smell this close is different, not sharp, not fresh, but aged, layered, a scent that lives in your throat and seems to taste like memory. You've smelled it in winter and summer, in rain and drought. It does not fade. It simply learns to blend. There is a puddle near the wall. You know better than to step over it. You walk around. Some days, you hear it. Not loudly, but just enough. A splash, a drip, a release. No shout to warn, no call of garde-à-lou as they might once have done in towns where language tried to dress up the inevitable. Here, there are no courtesies between floor and ground. The law is clear the higher up you live, the further away your filth falls from you. But that doesn't mean it vanishes. It only means someone else walks beneath it. Historians tend to treat medieval sanitation as either a joke or an anachronism, either overemphasizing the filth as evidence of backwardness or pretending public health was more advanced than the myths suggest. The truth, as usual, lies in the uncomfortable middle that everyone knew and everyone tried, and that trying does not always mean succeeding. They built trenches, they dug pits, they passed laws about waste disposal, but no law ever stopped a toddler from opening the privy latch during supper and tipping the family's chamber pot out the wrong window. And no trench ever cleaned itself. You pause beneath the window of an abandoned house. The privy above has collapsed partially, its beams snapped at the joint, now hanging sideways like a crooked jaw. Beneath it, the wall is streaked dark rain and other things having run together into a patina of decay. You wonder when the last time it was used. You wonder if anyone knew it would be the last. There is, after all, a moment like that for everything. You move on. Sleep anchor. We've wandered far, if you're not awake for the rest. Neither were most of them. Further down, a man is trying to repair one of the chutes. He is shirtless, his back streaked with sweat and soot. The tools he's using clearly meant for wood, but pressed into the task of plumbing. He glances at you, squints, and then returns to his work tapping a beam, muttering something about weight and angles. You wonder who lives above. You wonder what happens if he fails. You do not stop to help. This is not a street where people help. This is a street where people learn to hold their breath without thinking. You pass a doorway where a bucket sits just inside. Its contents are unclear, but the smell answers the question you hadn't asked. You remember once seeing a girl step out too quickly, just as someone above emptied a pot. It hit her shoulder, mostly, not her head. She screamed. She was young, she cried. Her mother scrubbed her with water and lavender stems, weeping as she did, but the scent remained. You caught it days later, in church. No one said anything, because nothing needed saying. In this town, you learn that dignity is not something given. It is something you defend by pretending you have not lost it. The wind shifts. Something drips onto your sleeve. You do not look up. You do not wipe it off. You walk faster. The street curves ahead, toward the bakery. And though the smell of yeast and smoke awaits you there, it will be faint today, because the stink of this corner has sunk too deep, because it clings not just to skin, but to memory. And memory, in this place, does not wash clean. The air in the market has a different weight today. Not heavier, not colder, just strange. It moves slower between people. It tastes different when it touches your tongue, like something has spoiled behind the fruit stalls, and no one wants to admit it. You pull your shawl tighter around your face as you make your way through the narrow row of vendors. Not because the morning is brisk, it isn't, but because something in your chest tightens each time a stranger exhales near you. And today, there are too many strangers. They press close, as they always do, brushing shoulders, bumping elbows, reaching over you for turnips or onions or whatever scrap of bruised apple remains on a mat that hasn't been washed in days. Everyone's breath mingles here. It is a currency as common as coin, and like coin, it is often exchanged without knowing what you've received in return. He finds you just past the fishmonger, a man not old, not young, not someone you recognize. He wears a hat pulled low, a cloak patched with pieces from at least 3 other garments, and gloves that were clearly made for someone else's hands. He moves with the sharp, twitchy energy of someone running from something invisible. He stumbles once. You pause without meaning to. And then he coughs. Not once, twice, then a third time. The sound is jagged, wrong, not a clearing of the throat, not a smoker's grunt, but something deeper, something that rattles, as if his lungs have turned brittle and are now trying to break themselves apart just to breathe. You feel it. Before you even realize you've leaned back. A warm, damp gust of air. It brushes your cheek. You do not scream. You do not flinch. But something inside you tightens, sharply, because you know what that breath means. You've heard this story before. A man coughs in the square. 3 days later, the fever begins. 5 days in, the skin darkens around the mouth, beneath the arms, across the groin. By the 7th day, the bells ring. Not for prayer, but for burial. He doesn't apologize, just turns and walks, staggering between stalls. People part without touching him. No one speaks. No one wants to claim they saw. No one wants to admit they still feel the breath on their skin. You stand still, counting heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. Nothing happens, but everything has. Sleep anchor. If your eyelids are heavy, you're exactly where most people stopped paying attention anyway. You leave the market early. There is no bread in your basket, no herbs, no onions, only silence. The way home is longer than usual, not in distance, but in time. Every sound is too loud. Every shape at the edge of your vision is too sharp. You pass a group of children playing near the fountain. One is coughing. You do not stop. At your door, you pause. You feel your own breath fog in the air. You exhale and check the color of it against the light. Still clear. You count again. 3 more heartbeats. Still here. Still whole. But not untouched. You step inside and close the door behind you. The room is warmer than you expected. You do not light the fire. You sit in the chair by the window and watch the street, waiting to see if the man passes again. He does not. You do not know whether to be relieved or afraid. Some say the plague travels with rats. Some say it travels in water, or wind, or bad dreams. But you know the truth. It travels with breath, with proximity, with kindness, with the human impulse to lean close and say, "Are you all right?" You did not say that today. You turned your head. You stepped back. You denied compassion in favor of distance. And now, as you sit, your throat tightens. Not with sickness. Not yet. But with guilt. The candle burns lower. You've forgotten to eat. You drink water boiled earlier and wonder if it still remembers the heat. You place your hand against your forehead. No fever? But it's early. Too early. You lie down, fully clothed, shawl still wrapped. You will not sleep. Not really. But you close your eyes, and you see him, not his face, not clearly, only the shape of him, only the sound, the cough, the breath, the knowledge that tomorrow or the next day your breath may not belong to you anymore. By the time the sun dips below the rooftops and the clouds begin to blush with that strange, copper hue of smoke and dusk, the town is already buzzing, not with joy, not quite, but with the particular kind of tension that comes when people decide or pretend they are not afraid of dying for at least one night, because tonight is the festival, not the grand one held once a year with banners and saints and sermons, but a smaller one, local, rough, the kind the bishop doesn't bless and the mayor tries to ignore. They call it the Night of Fires. No one remembers what it honors anymore. Some say it's pagan, something about a harvest long forgotten, or a demon once tricked into sleeping under the church. Others insist it's Christian, a martyr's feast twisted by time and beer. But no one really cares. What matters is that the fires are lit. What matters is that there is meat. What matters is that for a few hours, no one speaks about plague, or hunger, or the cough they heard in the night. You make your way slowly toward the square, following the glow. The air is thick with smoke and the scent of charring fat. Somewhere nearby, someone is burning pine wood, and the sap sings as it melts, adding sweetness to the heaviness. The fires are not in braziers tonight. They are on carts, in barrels, in pits dug hastily between buildings. Flames bloom everywhere, licking skyward like hands raised in prayer or warning. Sparks flit between homes like careless insects. You pass a girl with soot on her cheeks and a wreath of rosemary in her hair. She grins at nothing, barefoot, dancing in the flicker of 3 fires and the attention of no one. Her dress is torn at the hem. No one minds. People gather around roasting spits. What's turning there isn't always clear lamb, perhaps, or dog, or something that used to bark and now only sizzles. You do not ask. You take the bread you brought, hard as it is, and soften it with a dip into the grease pooling beneath a dripping carcass. The man beside you does the same. Neither of you speaks. There is music, drums, mostly, skins stretched too tight, played by hands that have never seen sheet music but know exactly how to keep feet moving. There's a pipe somewhere, too, a shrill, whining thing played by an old man whose mouth collapses inward like he's trying to swallow his own breath. The notes are not beautiful, but they are loud. Children run between legs, their faces smudged, their laughter bright and sharp against the low thump of drums. One of them carries a pig's skull like a crown, shouting words in a made-up language as he weaves through the crowd. Another pulls a toy cart holding candles and dead mice. This is the festival. It is not clean. It is not sacred. It is what remains when people refuse to grieve properly and instead choose noise. A woman stirs a pot as tall as her hip, muttering to herself. The contents bubble, red and brown and gold. She ladles it into wooden bowls, too hot, too thick, too salty. People eat without blowing. It burns the mouth. They do not care. You take one too. The taste is strong. The meat is soft. You stop asking questions. Sleep anchor. Some truths are so quiet they sound like dreams. Stay there. Somewhere near the well, 2 men wrestle not in anger, but ritual. The crowd watches as they slap, grab, stumble, and fall. No one wins. No one loses. Eventually, they collapse beside each other, laughing, and someone throws a cloak over them. They stay there. Someone else has started dancing, not a girl this time, but a man in boots too fine for this crowd, a feather in his cap that looks like it once belonged to a bird worth more than a week's wages. He spins, lifts his arms, sings off-key. A boy throws a handful of flour at him. The man doesn't stop. The fire crackles louder. You are not drunk, but you feel it, the looseness, the lightness in your knees, the way your thoughts stop clinging to themselves so tightly. For a moment, you forget the rats. You forget the mold. You forget the boy who coughed behind the forge and never came back. You forget the breath on your cheek. You are only here, with heat and meat and the strange, absurd comfort of chaos. Then the dogs arrive. Not many, just 2, thin, yellow-eyed, wary. They circle the crowd, silent and fast. People give them space, subtly, without speaking. The dogs do not beg. They do not growl. They wait. One finds a scrap beneath a bench and swallows it whole. They do not leave. You remember what happened last year? How a dog went mad near the lantern post and tore a child's hand open before anyone could move. How the men kicked it to death. How no one buried it. How it burned all night in a separate pit, and people threw bones at it like prayers. The music falters for a moment. Someone drops a drum. Someone else lights a new fire. The dogs watch. The sky is black now. You cannot see stars through the smoke. Only the orange glow above every rooftop, like the world is preparing to end, but wants to throw a final feast before it does. You stay longer than you should, because this is the kind of night you do not leave early. Not because of joy, but because leaving too soon means walking home alone, down streets where the fires have not reached, where the shadows stretch longer, where the sounds change. Eventually, though, you rise, you find your path, you move between people without touching them. You pass a man asleep in his soup, a woman crying into her own palm, a child laughing at nothing. The fire has begun to die. You do not look back, not even when the music rises again, not even when someone screams, not even when your foot lands in something warm and you realize you have no idea what it is. You walk home in silence, with the taste of fat on your tongue, with the smell of smoke in your hair, with the knowledge that tomorrow will not be a feast. It will be another day of blood and breath and rot, and that this burning was not a celebration, only a pause, only a howl between coughs. It begins with the smallest ache, a tug behind your jaw. Nothing sharp, just pressure, as though your teeth have begun to resent their place in your mouth and are quietly arguing with the bone that holds them there. You ignore it. You chew on the other side. You swish water and hope the pain is from sleeping strangely, or from that crust of bread you bit into too fast yesterday when you thought no one was watching. But the ache doesn't go away. It deepens. It roots. By nightfall, it has a pulse of its own. And by morning, your whole head feels like it's been stuffed with wool soaked in vinegar and nailed shut. You think about going to the barber, but then you remember the last time someone went to him with a swollen cheek. She came back missing more than a tooth. She came back with a stitched lip and no memory of the extraction. Only bruises on her jaw and eyes that would not close all the way for a week. They said he used a tool meant for hoofing mules. They said he drank while he worked. They said she screamed once, then didn't speak for 2 days. So you stay home. You chew slower. You wrap your face with a cloth and pretend the pressure helps. You crush dried thyme and push it against the tooth, muttering the prayer the herbalist taught you, even though it sounds more like a curse. It doesn't help. Your gums swell. Your face swells. The pain becomes bright, blinding. It shoots up behind your eye and down into your neck. You feel it in your ears, in the roots of your hair. Your thoughts begin to fracture. You lose time. You wake up unsure if the sun has risen or set. You stop eating. You try to sleep sitting up. You fail. You pace, half dreaming, bumping into walls. You cry once, not from the pain, from the isolation of it, the deep, enclosing knowledge that no one can enter this place with you, that it is yours entirely, and it does not care if you drown in it. Then comes the fever, not high at first, just enough to give your skin that shivering slickness that feels like a lie. You sweat, then chill, then sweat again. Your breath tastes like metal. You think your tongue might be turning black. You cannot look to check. Sleep anchor. We've wandered far. If you're not awake for the rest, neither were most of them. The next morning, someone knocks on your door. You do not answer. You are on the floor, wrapped in the blanket you spilled broth on 3 nights ago. It smells like mold and meat and something else, something inside you. The knocking stops. Later, when you manage to crawl to the basin, you spit, and what lands in the bowl is red and white and soft. You do not look too closely. You press a cloth against your cheek. You feel a shifting, a gap. Something is gone. Something else is trying to take its place. There's a story they tell about a man who grew another tooth not in his mouth, but in his throat. They say it sprouted from infection, twisted from bone. They say it tore him open from the inside, and he died trying to cough it out. You do not believe this, but you understand why someone needed to believe it. Because this pain needs a face, and the barber will not give it one, so it grows. You light a candle and place it beside your bed, not for comfort, but so you can see when the swelling reaches your eye. You begin to hallucinate, not vividly, not with dragons or saints or any of the visions, the fevered rich claim, but subtly. The walls seem to bend. The light looks dirty. The shadows do not move the way they used to. You try to recall your name. It arrives slowly. Then your mother's name. Then the name of the boy who died last year with blood on his pillow and no teeth left at all. You try to remember what day it is. You fail. Your cheek bursts during the night. You wake with a taste like spoiled milk and old iron in your mouth. The pillow is soaked. Your face is numb on one side, but your hands are shaking too hard to feel anything properly. You think you hear a voice. You think it says something kind. You think it says your name. But when you look, there's no one. Only the candle. Only the heat. Only the realization that the pain is different now. Duller. Farther away. You have passed through something. You have not won, but you are not drowning. Not tonight. You sleep. Not well, but you sleep. In the morning, you press your tongue to the gap where the tooth once lived. It feels like a wound. It feels like an escape. You spit again. Only blood this time. You boil water, though your hands shake. You swish. You breathe. You sit in the chair by the window, watching the square, waiting for something to arrive. Maybe hunger. Maybe memory. Maybe nothing. This is how most people survive. Not by healing, but by outlasting. The barber passes your window. He does not stop. He never knew you were sick. You do not wave. You do not speak. You simply sit. With one less tooth. With one more story. With the strange, sobering knowledge that death did not want you last night. But it looked, and you looked back. You do not intend to stop by the midwife's house. It is not a place you usually pass, not a corner of town you visit without reason, and certainly not where you linger unless someone you know has been brought there in pain and with prayers clutched to their chest like relics. But your feet seem to veer of their own accord today, drawn by something quieter than logic, something older than words, perhaps a pull stitched together from memory, rumor, and the heavy scent of boiled linens hanging damp over the windowsill. Her door is open. It always is when she's not working. That is the rule. The door is open if she is between births. If the door is closed, someone is screaming inside, or bleeding, or losing something they cannot name until it's gone. You step inside. She is there. Of course, seated by the fire with a rag in one hand and a chipped bowl of water in the other. Her hands are stained again. Not with blood today, but with something greenish-brown, thick and streaked like oversteeped nettle tea. Her apron is folded neatly at her waist. Her face is calm in the way only someone who has witnessed both too much and not enough can manage, lined, unreadable, always halfway between prayer and sarcasm. She does not look at you, but she speaks. You didn't come for a birth. You confirm that. Then you came to ask what went wrong. You do not respond. She dips her hands into the bowl and swishes gently. The water darkens. You think not for the first time about the phrase clean hands. It is spoken often here, especially by men who have never delivered a child, never watched a woman die screaming with her legs tied, never knelt on a floor slick with more than water. Clean hands mean innocence. Clean hands mean trust. Clean hands mean nothing when death is in the room, and your only tools are boiled rags, whispered guesses, and the sharp edge of knowing too much. You ask how many she's lost. She doesn't answer. That's not a question midwives answer. She tells you, Instead, that last week a girl no older than 13 delivered twins. One lived, one did not. The girl is not speaking now. She sits in her mother's house and eats only broth. She won't let anyone touch her. Then she says she helped a merchant's wife deliver a son. It was easy, almost pleasant. She sang during the second push, then bled to death before dawn. She tells you these things the way bakers talk about flour, without ceremony, without avoidance, not callous, just efficient, because there are no clean births, only ones that end. You sit across from her, careful not to disturb the basket of cloths near your feet. Some are white, some are not. She sighs. The worst are the fathers. She says after a long moment, they want to help, or to save, or to watch, but they don't know what to do with their hands. So they clutch the woman's head like it will keep her in place. Or they pray too loudly, or they faint. And when she dies, they look at me like it's my fault the gods weren't listening. You ask her if she believes in gods. She shrugs. I believe in patterns, she says, and in steam, and in whether the hips are kind. You glance toward the window. It is fogged from the heat inside the room. There is a baby's cry in the distance. Not here, not now, but near. She doesn't flinch at the sound. You ask her if she ever weeps. She wipes her hands again. Sometimes. You ask when it's the third sister, or the last daughter, or when the mother grabs my wrist and asks if she did something wrong. She leans back in her chair. There's always one moment, right before the final push, where she looks at me like I'm supposed to be someone else, a saint, maybe, or her own mother, or whatever god she was promised would come in that hour, and I never am, and she always sees it, and then she pushes anyway. Sleep anchor. If your eyelids are heavy, you're exactly where most people stopped paying attention anyway. You watch her hands now. They are steady. They move like they've stitched skin shut and guided life out of flesh and comforted husbands who didn't understand what death looks like when it comes for something already halfway into the world. You ask if she washes between births. She looks at you for the first time, holds your gaze, then says, very softly, when there is time, when there is water, when the last girl didn't die screaming. You nod, because the answer is not the point. The conditions are, she tells you about the cloths, how they used to boil everything, how now there's barely enough fuel for the stove, how sometimes she pretends the herbs have more power than they do, just so the room smells like hope. You ask about infection. She says it by another name, rot, the kind that starts deep, she says, before you even cut the cord. You can see it in the lips, the ears, sometimes the eyes. Sometimes it's already too late before the breath even comes. She's lost 6 this season. You do not ask for their names. She would not give them. You both sit in silence for a while. The fire crackles once. She begins to fold the cloths again. One by one, she stacks them carefully. You ask why she does it that way. So I know how many are missing. You ask what happens if one is missing. She says nothing. You ask again. She looks up. Then I find out where the blood is hiding. You stand. You thank her. Not for the answers, but for the way her voice did not shake. She does not thank you back. She nods and returns to her water. You step outside. The air is cooler than it should be. Your hands are clean, but you keep rubbing them together anyway, because you've learned that in this town, death doesn't always knock. Sometimes it breathes on your cheek. Sometimes it hides in the bread. Sometimes it climbs from the floorboards. And sometimes it leaves with the midwife. You have been told your whole life that water is the safest of all blessings, that it cleanses, sanctifies, cools fevered skin, and brings the body back from the edge when nothing else will. The priest sprinkles it on the dying and calls it holy. The herbalist boils it before steeping in bitter leaves. The midwife uses it to rinse the blood from her elbows. And yet here you are, mouth dry, stomach cramping, sweating even in the cool morning air, and all because yesterday you trusted it. You did not mean to drink. It was habit. It was reflex. It was a moment of thoughtlessness, of reaching for the bucket hanging by the door, scooping with the wooden ladle, swallowing twice before you even realized the taste was wrong. Not foul, not spoiled, just off faintly sweet, oddly metallic, as though someone had washed a blade in it and let the rust linger. You spit after the third gulp. Too late. The damage was already done. Today, your belly gurgles in a way that doesn't feel like hunger. Today, your joints ache like you've been running in your sleep. Today, your thoughts arrive slowly, through a mist that does not lift when you blink. And most of all, your thirst deepens. You drink again, boiled this time, salted and cooled, careful. But it doesn't help. It slides into you and disappears, like water into dry sand, and leaves nothing behind but a wider emptiness. Your tongue feels too large for your mouth. Your lips crack. You sit by the hearth and try to recall the last time your body felt trustworthy. You cannot. The first wave comes fast. Not vomit, not sweat, but pain, a tightness that coils behind the ribs and surges outward in waves, folding you in half and holding you there, breath shallow, knees weak. When it passes, you crawl, not to the door, not to a healer, just to the wall, to press your back against something that does not move. You tell yourself this is temporary, that you are strong, that you have survived worse. You have not. Water, when it turns against you, is cruel in ways fire never dreams. Fire burns once. Water deceives. It enters the body politely, and then begins to take, first the warmth from your limbs, then the clarity from your thoughts, then the feeling in your hands, then your dignity, because when the second wave comes, you do not make it to the bucket, and suddenly you are not a person anymore. You are a leaking sack of pain, too ashamed to call for help and too weak to clean what now puddles beneath you. Sleep anchor. If your eyelids are heavy, you're exactly where most people stopped paying attention anyway. You remember, dimly, the old saying, all disease begins in the stomach. You never believed it. Now, it feels like prophecy. You lie on the floor for what might be hours. You dream, or you hallucinate, or both. You are walking through a river. The water is clear, then brown, then red, then nothing. You wake. The light has changed. Afternoon has gone. Night is coming. You try to sit. Your arms shake. You sweat. But your skin feels cold. You hear footsteps outside. Voices. A child laughing. You do not call out. What would you say? I drank from the bucket. I thought it was safe. I didn't know. Everyone knows. They just forget. Until the forgetting reminds them. You remember stories of towns where water killed more than plague, where the wells were poisoned not by malice, but by indifference, where chamber pots were emptied too close to the streams, where animals bathed upstream and children bathed downstream, where corpses floated unnoticed for days, mouths open, eyes gone. You remember a boy from your childhood. He was fast, loud, always barefoot. He drank from a puddle one summer. He was buried the next week. The priest blamed his parents. The parents blamed the rain. The rain said nothing. You crawl toward the kettle. There is no fire beneath it now, but the water is warm. You sip. It stays down. You sip again. It stays again. You thank no one, because this is not salvation. This is delay. You will live. Probably. But you have joined a new group now. The ones who do not trust the ladle, who sniff the bucket twice, who drink slowly, always ready to spit, who feel a twitch in the gut and freeze. You have seen what water can do. And you will not forget, even if everyone else does, especially because everyone else does. The ache returns, gentler this time. A reminder. You close your eyes. You breathe slowly. You imagine a river that never lied. And you know you will never find it. Not here. Not in this town. Where the wells whisper. Where the gutters murmur. Where the water waits. There's a moment in every illness, if it lasts long enough, deepens just so, when you stop wondering if you'll die and begin wondering if anyone will know, not whether they'll care. You stopped hoping for that days ago, just whether they'll notice, whether a neighbor will pause at your absence, whether someone will mention your name, whether the church bell will toll, as it does for the old, the rich, the married, and the loudly dead. But today, the bell is quiet, and you are still alive, though barely. You've stopped moving much, not out of fear, not even out of exhaustion, but because the house has become an echo chamber, and every footstep feels like a noise you are not strong enough to explain. The floor creaks, the table sighs, the wood of the doorframe groans every time the wind changes, and you sit, wrapped in 3 layers of cloth, pressed into the corner where the sun sometimes lands for a few minutes before disappearing again. No one has come, no one knocked, no one peeked in, pretending they were just passing. You begin to wonder if you've slipped outside the map, not of the town, but of notice. You were never loud. You were never cruel. You were useful, sometimes. You fetched water when the baker's daughter sprained her ankle. You gave your extra cloth to the widow whose roof collapsed. You mended the boy's jacket when his mother was too tired to ask. But quiet kindness is not remembered loudly. And absence, when it is not inconvenient, is not always noticed. Sleep anchor. If your eyelids are heavy, you're exactly where most people stopped paying attention anyway. You drift, not into sleep, into something under sleep. A gray space. A hovering. You remember old tales whispered in kitchens, muttered in market stalls about those who passed without witness, who died quietly, curled on straw, their names half erased already. They say their spirits wander, not angry, just lost, just confused that no one came. You imagine that. You imagine your own body, still and cold, not found for days. A rat tugging at your sleeve, a bird pecking at your unlatched door, then eventually, the smell, and someone passing by, handkerchief pressed to their face, muttering a curse to no one in particular. You imagine them finding you, too late for the priest, too late for dignity, but not too late for disposal. There is a phrase they use when the church is too busy burial with no bell. The words feel heavy now. You try to remember the last sound you heard. Not the market, not the midwife, not even the leper's bell. Just a cough. Yours, the only thing that breaks the silence now. You reach for water. The ladle is dry. You don't rise. You wait, because movement is not always worth what it costs. Your limbs ache. Your ribs press harder against the inside of your skin than they did a week ago. You try to hum something. Anything. Your voice cracks. You hear footsteps. Or imagine them. They pass. No knock. No pause. Just the sound of boots continuing down the lane. You are not on anyone's list today. You are not due a visit. You are not expected. That is both a blessing and a curse. You begin to write a name with your finger in the dust on the floor. You do not finish it. You close your eyes. You think, just for a moment, of rising, of opening the door, of standing outside and waving to someone, anyone. But you don't, because the silence feels too complete now, like a wall that grew around you while you were sleeping. And besides, you have nothing left to say. You rest your head against the stone. You listen for the bell. Just once. Just to know. It doesn't come. No chime. No toll. No echo. Just wind. Just breath. just the soft hum of time continuing. Without announcement, without witness. You are not dead. Not yet. But you know what it feels like to be forgotten before you've gone. You inhale, you exhale, and then you do it again. Because you can. Because no one told you not to. Because sometimes the bell doesn't toll, and still you remain. It's nearing dusk again, and the clouds are sitting heavy over the town, like someone laid wool across the sky and forgot to pull it taut. The light is dim, not because the sun has gone, but because the air itself feels faded, like the town has been dipped in gray water and left to hang. Somewhere, a dog barks once, then again, then falls silent. Somewhere else, someone laughs not joyfully, but loudly enough to be heard. You don't rise from your chair. You've been listening for that laugh all day, because it means someone lived. Someone made it to evening without coughing up blood, without slipping on a wet stone, without drinking the wrong cup or stepping in the wrong shadow. It's not celebration. It's survival noise. You think about the graveyard outside the northern wall, not the one with the proper markers and clean rows of stones where the priest swings his censer and the rich lay wreaths. The other one, the low ground, the field where burials happen in silence, where the gravedigger doesn't ask questions, and the bodies come wrapped in whatever was available: blankets, burlap sacks, pieces of old tents, and, when the family was lucky, a shroud someone else died in years before and was quietly reclaimed from a shallow grave no one visited anymore. They call it the borrowed cloth, a kindness, a thrift, a shame. No one speaks of it aloud, but everyone knows. You've seen them, the shrouds that look too worn, the ones with stitching that doesn't match, with names half unpicked from the hem. You've watched the digger pause before laying a body down, as if trying to remember who wore the shroud last, whether they ever said thank you before the soil closed again. It's a strange kind of recycling, not of goods, of dignity. You remember a woman old, sharp-tongued, lived near the tanner. She died quietly in spring, and no one came to claim her. They wrapped her in what looked like a tapestry, the kind once used to cover the table in the guild hall. The next week, you saw a man wrapped in the same cloth, same wine stain on the corner, same missing tassel. He hadn't known her, but now they share something. Maybe that counts. Sleep anchor. We've wandered far. If you're not awake for the rest, neither were most of them. You wonder what will wrap you. You don't own much. Not cloth worth stitching. Not blankets not already patched twice. You imagine the herbalist's scarf, if she still remembers you, or the apron you've worn for seasons. You hope it's something soft. You hope it's something that doesn't smell too much of fear. You think about the prayers people whisper at those graves, the ones without names, just wooden stakes or a circle of rocks. The prayers are never long, never poetic, usually just a name or an apology or a joke told badly through tears. The priest sometimes tries to bless them anyway, but he never comes for all of them. He says the Lord hears everything. You are not sure that's true. You stand, slowly, legs aching from too many hours in one position. You walk to the basin. You rinse your hands, even though there's no one to see them clean. You light a candle. You sit again, and you think about the borrowed shroud, not as an ending, but as a thread in a larger fabric, worn, reused, still holding, still wrapping something human, still enough. You look toward the window. There is no one there, but if someone passed, they would see a small light burning. They would see a figure seated still, not bowed, not curled, just present. And they might remember, or not, but for now, the light remains. And so do you. You've wandered far enough through this half-told mess. There's no need to tie up loose ends. They've been fraying for centuries. If you forgot half of this already, good. If you're still awake, that's peculiar. But you're not alone. This isn't a story with heroes. It's a ledger of what hurt quietly, of what endured, of what never asked to be remembered, but left stains. It's all the same. And if something from tonight followed you into your dreams, may it walk gently. No boots, no bells, just the soft drag of fabric and a whispered name you never learned how to say. Leave a dot. If this strange drift kept you company, no explanations, no farewells. Sleep however you must. History won't notice, but I might.